It's 4 p.m. on the East Coast, and bad news from Wall Street. The markets just closed. The Dow, NASDAQ, and S&P 500 all finishing in the red, with the NASDAQ seeing the biggest drop, closing down more than 2%. The dip in markets comes even after a better-than-expected jobs report. This morning, the Labor Department reported the U.S. economy added 119,000 jobs in September. Meanwhile, from Wall Street to Pennsylvania Avenue, President Trump has now signed the bill to release the Epstein files. So what's next? Attorney General Mamdani has 30 days to release those documents. White House correspondent Mike Carter standing by with the latest from the White House. Plus, the United States and Russia now may have a plan to end the war in Ukraine. But what does Ukraine think of that plan? Ukrainian ambassador to the United States, Olha Stefanishyna, is here. But first, White House correspondent Mike Carter is at the White House. Mike?
Yeah, Greta, as you mentioned, new better-than-expected jobs report out for the month of September. Remember, we had the government shutdown, so no numbers from October. And those September numbers were supposed to come October 3rd, of course, delayed more than a month. Now we have them. Now we know. The United States adding 119,000 jobs in the month of September. Much better than expected. We were only expected about 50,000 jobs added to the economy. So the Trump administration happy to hear this. It's the best jobs numbers since April's jobs report. Meanwhile, unemployment ticking up slightly in the month of September. It's up 4.4%. That was up 0.1% from August, where it was at 4.3%. Here's what the vice president had to say, Greta, today about these new job numbers.
What this shows is that the Trump economic policies are actually working. And you've got 119,000 new jobs. Economists thought that we would have about 50,000 new jobs, but that's actually just the headline number. If you look below the surface, I think the numbers are actually better. So number one, wages continue to way outpace inflation. If you go back to the 3 years of the Biden administration, the average American worker actually lost about $3,000 of take-home pay. In the first 10 months of the Trump economy, we've increased take-home pay by about $1,200, adjusting for inflation. So that's a huge, huge thing, and this jobs report confirms that.
Well, despite reports to the contrary coming into today, Axios reporting this afternoon that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky told U.S. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll today he's willing to work with the Trump administration on its new draft plan for peace in Ukraine. The plan calls on Ukraine to make some concessions on things that, up until now, Zelensky has been unwilling to budge on, including handing over territory to Russia currently controlled by Ukraine. But rather than reject it outright, Zelensky seems to now be willing to negotiate.
I want you to understand that the administration has talked equally with both sides. You have seen President Trump engage directly with both President Putin and President Zelensky. Likewise, his national security team has as well. In fact, Special Envoy Witkoff and Secretary Rubio met with some of the Ukrainians just in the past week to discuss this very plan. And so just like you saw with respect to Israel and Gaza, we are hearing out both sides of this war to understand what can you commit to end the war.
And Greta, a bit of good news this afternoon at the White House. Despite your politics, you have to be happy about this. The president meeting with a group of several of the remaining Israeli hostages that the Trump administration helped to free from captivity under Hamas late last month. Of course, October 13th, the 20 remaining hostages freed, returning to their families, and several of them and their families in attendance at the White House this afternoon. Tomorrow, Greta, you're not going to want to miss this. The next mayor of New York City, Zohran Mamdani, meeting with President Trump at the White House. Boy, we've seen a lot of interesting bilaterals. This will be one for the record books. It's not exactly a bilateral agreement or meeting, but we have President Trump meeting with Democratic Socialist Zohran Mamdani. Caroline Levitt saying today, it speaks volumes that tomorrow we have a communist coming to the White House, because that's who the Democrat Party elected as the next mayor of the country's largest city. Greta?
Mike Carter at the White House. Thank you, sir. And you just heard Mike Carter. Tomorrow, New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani is coming to town. President Trump posted on X, quote, "Communist Mayor of New York City, Zohran Kwame Mamdani, has asked for a meeting. We've agreed that this meeting will take place at the Oval Office on Friday, November 21st. Further details to follow," end quote. And earlier today, ahead of his meeting with President Trump, Mamdani held a press conference.
My team reached out to the White House to set up this meeting because I will work with anyone to make life more affordable for the more than 8.5 million people who call this city home. I have many disagreements with the president, and I believe that we should be relentless and pursue all avenues and all meetings that could make our city affordable for every single New Yorker. I intend to make it clear to President Trump that I will work with him on any agenda that benefits New Yorkers. If an agenda hurts New Yorkers, I will also be the first to say so.
And we have some breaking news. A judge, U.S. District Court judge for District of Columbia, Giacob, has ruled President Trump's deployment of National Guard troops to Washington, D.C. was illegal. The judge says, quote, the court rejects defendants' flyby assertion of constitutional power, finding that such a broad reading of the president's Article II authority would raise Congress's role in governing the district and its National Guard, end quote. Trump deployed the Guard to tackle crime, and Mayor Bowser actually appreciated it. Coming up, the Saudi Crown Prince dropped a big hint about what? Find out from Senator Joni Ernst, who met with the prince and joins me next. That when the record continues.
Charlie was the best of America, and the monster who attacked him was attacking our whole country.
Before Charlie Kirk died, he issued a stark warning of terrifying dangers ahead in a new book, Pagan Threat, authored by Pastor Lucas Miles. Charlie said Pagan Threat could save America and that you must read it. Get Pagan Threat free with Newsmax's special offer. Plus, get Dick Morse's new book, The Real Charlie Kirk. 2 great books with our free offer today.
Hello, this is Franklin Graham. This Thanksgiving, what are you thankful for? You're thankful for family, your friends. How about God? That's right. Are you thankful for God? You see, God made you. He created you. He loves you. And you say, but Franklin, my life is in such a mess. I'm not sure I'm thankful for my life. Well, that's why God sent his son, Jesus Christ, to this earth to save us from this mess of sin that we live in. You see, that's right. God sent his son, Jesus Christ, to this earth to take your sins. He died and shed his blood on a cross for our sins, but on the 3rd day, God raised him to life. He's not dead. He's alive. And he'll come into your heart right now if you invite him. Just pray this prayer with me. Just say, God, I'm a sinner. I'm sorry. Forgive me. I want to invite Jesus to come into my heart, to take control of my life. I want to surrender my life to him. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. If you prayed that prayer, call that number that's on the screen.
I'm Elmer Heinrich, at 91 years of age, here with my wife Shirley, who is 83. Now, both of us are still cutting a wide swath in life, all because of Immuno 150. Now, we are asking you to use Immuno 150 like we do. Give it a chance for at least 90 days so that you can see what 70 plant minerals and 80 additional nutrients can do for you.
It really is incredible.
Yeah, try it. You will be surprised. Order now. You'll be glad you did.
Democratic Congresswoman from Florida, Sheila Sherfilis McCormick, has been indicted. The charges accuse her of stealing $5 million in federal disaster funds. She's also accused of using some of the money to help her 2021 campaign. According to federal prosecutors, Congresswoman Sherfilis McCormick stole FEMA overpayments. Her family received payments through a federally funded COVID-19 vaccination staffing contract. Prosecutors allege a portion of the money was then funneled to support her campaign through candidate contributions. Attorney General Pam Bondi releasing a statement saying, quote, using disaster relief funds for self-enrichment is a particularly selfish, cynical crime. No one is above the law, least of all powerful people who rob taxpayers for personal gain. We will follow the facts in this case and deliver justice, end quote. And earlier this week, we all saw it. President Trump held a warm and friendly meeting with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. An important topic was the Abraham Accords. The Saudis have said they would join the Abraham Accords, but only after there is a credible and guaranteed path to Palestinian statehood. On Tuesday night, co-chair of the Abraham Accords caucus, Senator Joni Ernst, hosted the Crown Prince for a private meeting with lawmakers. Republican Senator Joni Ernst joins me. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Great to be with you, Greta.
It seemed like Saudi Arabia was going to sign on to the Accords right before October 7th of 2023. And everyone seemed so optimistic, and then October 7th happened. What was your sense about Saudi Arabia the other night?
Absolutely. Well, I was very optimistic after leaving that historic meeting with the Crown Prince. I will tell you, I was up close and personal on October 7th. I was actually in Saudi Arabia Arabia. I was leading a congressional delegation of House and Senate members. We had met with the Crown Prince the evening of October 6th.
So you're old friends.
Old friends.
Yeah.
But no, we left that meeting, though, very optimistic. We were overjoyed because at that point in time, the Crown Prince had indicated there was a path forward to normalization with Israel. We wake up the morning of October 7th on our way to Israel, and we find out Israel has been attacked. It did sideline those discussions now for 2 years, but I do feel like we are back on track. There are still some significant parts that need to be worked out.
But it seemed that, I mean, I don't remember the two-state solution as being a prerequisite 2 years ago, but when this war broke out, now Saudi Arabia says that there's got to be a path forward for Palestinians for a state. And Prime Minister Netanyahu and his party, I believe, if my memory is correct, has said that this is not going to happen.
Yes, and what cannot happen is Hamas can't be rewarded for the attacks on October 7th. And many would see a two-state solution as rewarding Hamas. But this is yet to be determined. But we know now there are some lines that have been drawn. We need to figure out how to move forward on that.
You know, meeting with the Crown Prince, and there's a lot of controversy because the CIA has said that he acknowledged or admitted or did something or contributed to or whatever, okayed the literally chopping up of the journalist Khashoggi, who worked for the Washington Post. But it is a fact that we have to meet with very unsavory people to move things forward, and it's sort of difficult sometimes to explain to people, like, how can you talk to him? We dealt with Stalin in World War II.
Right. And that's where diplomacy has to have its role. We have soft power, we have hard power. And in the United States, the preferred method of working through any disagreement will always be soft power or diplomacy. And sometimes it is very difficult in meeting with people that you have severe disagreements over. But if it means greater peace and prosperity for the United States and for the Middle East, we should find a path forward.
It's also sort of hard, like when I've talked to people who have done terrible things, I look at them and I think, you know, as I have a very cordial conversation, I think, how in the world could you have done that?
Right, exactly.
I mean, it's just so unthinkable because, you know, we don't do those things. All right, turning to Iowa, the great state of Iowa. Farmers in Iowa, I've been reading, are having a hard time. There are a lot of bankruptcies already this year.
Yes, and this is the third year of declining farm revenue. So this is not a new phenomena that our Iowa farmers are facing. We saw this under President Joe Biden, where there were absolutely no trade deals for our farmers. We see greater trade deals now in the Trump administration, but it will take a time to recover. So we're on the right path, but we know that input costs have gone up for our farmers. The input costs are greater than what they're receiving on their commodities like corn and soybeans. So additional trade, additional consumption of those products here in the United States, lowering those input costs, all of that will put us on a path to stabilizing our farm economy.
When you sat down, we sort of exchanged with small talk, and I said, I'm from a farming state, you're from a farming state, but you actually have better experience. You grew up on a farm.
I did. I grew up on a corn, soybean farm in southwest Iowa. We had hogs until I was about high school aged, but my family still farms. My dad still lives on the farm that I was raised on. My sister and brother-in-law do the farming in our family right now, but it's a wonderful livelihood for so many families in Iowa.
And your colleague, Senator Grassley, is an actual active farmer in his 90s.
He is. He was ready to get on the plane today wearing his John Deere hat and his blue jeans.
Is it, you know, farming, I love the small farm, but it seems that corporate farming has sort of taken over. Is it, are the small farms, they're done?
I don't think so. In Iowa, small farms prevail. We have 89,000 family farms across the state of Iowa. It's a great place to live and grow. Every weekend I go home, I get to spend time out in the countryside with my brother, my sister, my family members. It truly is a great way to live. And God bless our farmers. America needs farmers.
And we have such a robust trade with China over farm products. Even the president.
We do.
When I was in Iowa one time, I think the Iowa farmer who hosted me, I think, said that President Xi who had gone to school had years ago been on some exchange program or been in Iowa.
He did. President Xi lived for a short while near Muscatine, Iowa, eastern Iowa, and the family that he had stayed with, I believe, is still on their family
But that's where I
farm
was.
as well.
That's where I was, because
Muscatine, Iowa.
They were talking about the fact that the president of China had spent time on their farm.
Yes, and that's how he developed that relationship with our former governor, Terry Branstad, who then in the first Trump administration became the ambassador to China under President Trump. So it is a relationship that has stood the test of time. There is a lot of trade that occurs between Iowa and China. Unfortunately, China does take advantage of the American farmer by canceling contracts, then lowering their bid price, renegotiating. So in the end, the American farmer does get hurt by China, but we absolutely do want those contracts.
How about the tariffs that the president's imposed? Does that have any impact?
I think he was pushing back on China to reset the trade policy, and I think he has done that. Now, we have secured additional soybean contracts with China after his last discussion with President Xi. They've committed to buying soybeans in this year and many more in the outlying years. So we just need to make sure that we are holding them to those contracts.
All right, the government shutdown, that's over, but it's not really, because January 29th, the continuing resolution is only short term. So are we going to go through this drama again, or is there progress being made on the Hill?
Well, heavens, Greta, I hope not. So what we do see is movement with an additional 5 appropriations bills that our chair, Susan Collins, hopes to be able to package together, get those next 5 appropriations bills over the finish line. At that point, then we will have funded 90% or better of the federal government prior to that January 30th deadline. So let's pray we can all get along and get it over the finish line.
There should be some provision, because everyone's sent to Washington and the members of Congress, the Senate, to run the government. And then when there's a shutdown, the House and the Senate, because it's a different appropriations constitution, you still get paid. And these people aren't getting paid.
Right, exactly. And that's where all of the Iowa delegation, all of us said we will not take our pay until other federal workers are paid. So we had our pay held as well. But this is a discussion amongst the members in the Senate, is if our workers and federal workers, the military, they are not getting paid, we should not be receiving our paychecks either. I think we all agree with that. So John Kennedy has a measure that addresses member pay, so we are considering that. There are other options out there as well, just simply not to go through government shutdowns.
I did not know that Iowa delegation didn't get paid, because we only report bad news and horrible. We never report good things that you all are doing. So anyway, I tip my hat to the Iowa delegation. Thank you very much, Senator Joni Ernst. Thank you.
Thanks, Greta.
Coming up, does President Trump have a plan on the table, but does Ukraine like it or even seen it? I speak with the Ukrainian ambassador. That's next when the record continues.
My husband is Miguel Cervantes, who was a firefighter with the Rancho Cucamonga Fire District. That's what he absolutely loved. My husband's cancer is directly related to his service as a firefighter. My immediate thought after he was gone was, how am I going to do this? Tunnel to Towers said that it would be their honor to help me out by covering my mortgage. To say that it's been a weight lifted off my shoulder would be an understatement.
I'm Elmer Heinrich, at 91 years of age, with my wife Shirley, who is 83. Now, both of us are still cutting a wide swath in life, all because of Immuno 150. Now, neither of us have any kind of sickness, and we're as flexible as we were 30 years ago, and we still do the physical things we did 30 years ago. Now, we are asking you to use Immuno 150 like we do. Give it a chance for at least 90 days so that you can see what 70 plant minerals and 80 additional nutrients can do for you. You won't believe it. Immuno 150 is an awesome nutritional supplement. There's nothing like it.
Yes, it really is incredible.
Yeah, try it. You will be surprised. Order online or call the number listed on the screen, but don't place your order until after you've watched the videos on our website. Thank you from both of us, and God bless.
Have you compared your Medicare plan recently? With eHealth, you can compare Medicare plans side by side for free. So we invited people to give eHealth a try, and discover how easy it can be to find your Medicare match.
This is pretty amazing.
I can go on a vacation with this money.
I have quite a few prescriptions.
That's why people call us. We're going to compare plans, and I'm going to try to get you as much bang for your buck as possible.
That's great.
This one here covers all your prescriptions, your doctors as well.
Oh, wonderful.
I have a hard time with this.
That's okay. That's what I'm here for. Based on our conversation today, I would highly recommend this plan.
You're so helpful. You don't know.
I'm excited for you, sir. Again, my name is Cham. If you have any other questions, give me a ring.
Thank you very much. Oh my God, that was super easy.
See how your Medicare plan stacks up with the big changes for 2026. Just call this number or get started at ehealth.com. Compare plans that cover your doctors, prescriptions, pharmacy, and budget. And compare plans from the nation's top insurance companies. They pay us to help you. How much do you think you'll be able to save using eHealth?
At least $300 a month.
Would you say you found your Medicare match?
Yes, I did. What Cham did, she explained to me exactly what I needed to know.
Well, I have a surprise for you. Cham, come on out.
Oh my goodness.
It's a pleasure to meet you today, sir.
What does it feel like to be face to face?
You helped me out quite a bit.
Call to meet your advisor. They're paid the same no matter which Medicare Advantage plan you choose. Ask them about eHealth Live Advice or get started on your own at eHealth.com. Either way, it's always a free service. See if you could get more for less with eHealth, like these folks did.
The savings are unbelievable.
I could see the costs side by side.
eHealth is wonderful. $1,200 savings in my pocket. I was really pleasantly surprised with that.
Call 1-800-708-0234 to compare Medicare plans in your area or visit ehealth.com.
eHealth, your Medicare matchmaker.
There could be, just could be, a peace plan to end Russia's war in Ukraine that started back in 2014. According to the Wall Street Journal, citing anonymous sources, and you know how I feel about anonymous sources, I hate them, but the proposal has Ukraine giving up some territory to Russia. The Journal also says the plan removes demands for a peacekeeping force to deter future attacks by Russia. Top advisor Russian President Vladimir Putin, Kirill Dmitriev, told Axios on Monday that he and Trump envoy Steve Witkoff came up with the peace proposal. Now, in April this year, I sat down with Kirill Dmitriev in Washington. I asked him, what would it take to end the war in Ukraine?
Well, I think our diplomats and our leaders are working a lot on the solution. I think the solution needs to be realistic because many people advocate solutions that are not realistic. And they sort of take this righteous position of let's do something very unrealistic and it has to be done. So I think a solution requires realistic diplomacy. And I think President Trump and his team are pushing for this solution. And as I mentioned, the first de-escalation already happened. And they're really making sure that Russia and Ukraine can come together and have an agreement.
So what does Ukraine think? Today, Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky met with the United States Army Secretary Daniel Driscoll to discuss options for achieving peace. In a post on X, Zelensky writes, quote, "Our teams of Ukraine and the United States will work on the provisions of the plan to end the war. We are ready for constructive, honest, and swift work." Zelensky also says, quote, "Peace is needed, and we appreciate the efforts of President Trump and his team aimed at restoring security in Europe," end quote. Ukrainian ambassador to the United States, Olha Stefanishyna, joins me. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you for welcoming me here.
This plan, by the way, I should add that my husband is, parenthetically, is the Deputy Special Envoy to Ukraine, and I've been there a couple times. But this plan, it has Ukraine giving up territory. How will that sit with the people of Ukraine?
Well, the very interesting piece of video you showed with Kirill Dmitriev, and you might have understood that there's nothing concrete there. There's nothing concrete there, but Ukraine has always been concrete very, very much, and we're really happy that there is a proposal of a number of points and a plan on the table, and we're happy that this dialogue has been taking place today in person with Secretary of Army Daniel Driscoll, and my president said that we're ready to work on that. There are issues related to territory, but there's like a broader amount of issues related to security guarantees, related to issues of armament and many others. So,
but that's another thing too, is that Russia says it objects to peacekeepers. Now, how can you object to peacekeepers? I mean, that puts off a red light in my mind. If you don't want peacekeepers there.
Well, means that Russia probably doesn't want peace.
That's right. And so this whole thing, I mean, President Trump has bent over backwards trying to get Russia to the table and trying to get Russia to talk. But Putin doesn't talk. I mean, he's not negotiating anything.
Well, it doesn't mean that we don't have to do anything, right? So I think there are like two major bottom lines. First, Ukraine is really committed to peace, and nobody in the whole planet wants to end the war more than Ukrainians. But the second thing we're committed is to back up President Trump in whatever way we can so that his commitment to end the war in Ukraine is materialized. So that means that whatever ways we can encircle Russia and force her to commit to the arrangement, this should be taken. Sanctions have been applied, frozen assets to be seized. Ukraine produces a long-range capabilities, reaching out to Russian territory, disabling them from further attacks. Many things are happening, and while the negotiations are taking place, it doesn't mean that we don't have to put more pressure on them.
You know, nobody likes war. I don't like war. Ukraine doesn't want war. Poland doesn't want it expanding into Poland. But, you know, there's something so fundamentally unfair about Russia going into Ukraine, taking its children, kidnapping its children, not wanting to talk, not wanting peacekeepers, killing civilians all the time. And, and they're probably going to get away with, in the end, for a lot of it, because people really want the killing to stop. Ukraine wants the killing to stop.
Well, I think we all have to be aware that it's 21st century, and you cannot write history by putting some narrative just on paper or just making like sort of a media outreach. This is the most documented and public war in the history. There is no way that you can hide that children were massively abducted and transferred to the Russian territory. There's no way you can hide the massive tortures, rapes, and murderies happening in the occupied areas. This is all public. This is online, on the videos, on the millions of pictures. So you can put on paper one thing, but there you cannot really make this unseen.
But the other thing, too, that I don't think a lot of people really think about this, but the war didn't begin in February of 2022. The war really began in 2014 when Russia went into Crimea. This has been a long-standing war, but then we had this sort of gap when Russia was not that active. And so, you know, I'm just so suspicious of Russia, is that even, you know, and I realize that something has to be done, but, and I don't pretend to have the answers, but Russia has not shown a commitment to peace on any of this.
Well, in 2014, this was a brutal breach of any elements of the international order, right? But in 2022, we not only have seen the full-scale invasion and aggression military started against Ukraine as a state which has not been in war with Russia initiated by us or had any territorial claims, but we also saw such crimes against humanity, which are not only not Christian, they're unhumane. And this is very different. This is fundamental. This is something that we're talking about when we're talking about the plan. We're talking about ending the war and stopping the war. But this is not about justice. It doesn't mean that we have to change the truth and the reality. These crimes have happened, and these are.
That's the way President Trump thinks too. This is, you know, this has got to stop.
Yes.
And he does, you know, because he says that he looks at pictures almost every day, or he sees a lot of pictures of, you know, the carnage from the war, and he can't stand it. He can't stand to see any more dead people.
Yes, and I also recall all the time what he said after the last meeting with my president here in Washington, that the war should be stopped and let history decide. And what we're talking about, that there's no way that history could have a different angle from that, because the whole world have seen what has been happening in Ukraine. You have seen it with your eyes. Like the American cameras, American journalists were just seeing the exhumation of bodies from the massive graves. They saw the bodies of people with their heads tied behind their backs and they're just shot in their heads. We all see it. We all know it. So, but it doesn't mean that we have to consider everything at once. We really should stop this war on the terms which will make it possible really for Ukraine and for people of Ukraine. And I think we should never really stop getting credit to President Trump being a president of the United States and making a personal commitment to end the war in Ukraine and sticking to this promise. So I'm sure that whatever we can do to back up this effort, this should be done.
Yeah, and it is true, Amy, because President Trump is doing so against some of the opinion of people in the United States, because the United States, Ukraine is far away, and we have problems here in the United States. Yet the president can do two things at once, but he has been committed to trying to stop this war. And I think when you talk to people, journalists who have been there and have seen the atrocities, it's like, it's so unthinkable. I mean, it's what's going on in Ukraine is just so difficult to think of. And even things like when they destroy the power grid and people are freezing cold in Ukraine, it's a very cold country sometimes. The suffering that's gone on for the civilians of Ukraine is just unthinkable.
Yes. Is that even humane? It's not about the war. It's not about territory, shooting the 1-ton missiles on a kindergarten. It has nothing to do with the territory. It wasn't happening on Donbas or Zaporizhia, right? It was deliberately done to kill Ukrainian people. To kill people, is that even humane or any kind of Christian to think about that? And I can use this momentum also to say one thing, that for every American, if you are still answering the question, why do you have to care about Ukraine? I would say thinking about Ukraine is just like talking to yourself, because you're always frank and open to yourself. And when you talk to yourself, you're talking to your values and to your convictions and what you really stand for. And this is what Ukraine about. And this is what the attitude to this aggression is about. And I think when you're speaking to yourself, when you are true to yourself, you know what is good and you know what is bad.
Well, President Trump is determined to end this war. And, so I'm hopeful that this time that this plan, whatever it unrolls to be and whatever is ultimately agreed on, works, because it's just it's just unthinkable what your country's gone through. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for your support.
Coming up, former Vice President Dick Cheney's funeral was a bit of a who's who of D.C. 2 former presidents, Joe Biden and George W. Bush, 3 former vice presidents, Kamala Harris, Mike Pence, and Al Gore. The list is long, but who was not invited? That one, the record continues.
It's true. I am an America First, liberty-loving Latino. That's why I know this country is worth fighting for. That's why the Chris Salcedo Show will always tell you the truth.
The Chris Salcedo Show, for the news you need to know.
Joining us is Dr. Drew from the Wellness Company with advice for dealing with seasonal colds and flu. Doctor?
Cold and flu season is here, and every year you or a loved one gets sick. Your doctor can't see you. Waiting in a crowded urgent care is brutal. This is a particularly bad cold and flu season, and it's why doctors suggest every family needs an emergency medical kit. Your medical emergency kit is filled with essential prescriptions. It includes antibiotics like generic Z-Pak to get well faster, amoxicillin for pneumonia, strep throat, ear infections, plus prescriptions for nausea and UTIs, and even ivermectin. It's easy. Just match your symptoms to the prescription in your guidebook or call the telemedicine doctor standing by. Take your medication early and feel better faster. Having a medical emergency kit is like having an urgent care in your home. No waiting to see a doctor, no lines at the pharmacy.
Smart advice. We've shared the website and discount code below to save viewers $45. Order now and your kit will be rushed to your door. Thank you, doctor.
Can your roof handle another winter? Cold weather makes your roof dry, brittle, and crack.
If you're just hoping your roof survives, that's risky. Let us inspect it for free, giving you peace of mind before winter hits. And if your roof needs some help, we'll try to restore it, not replace it, saving you thousands. Not every roof qualifies, but most do.
Call now and you'll get a free roof tune-up with your Newsmax treatment.
Nobody knows Corvettes like McMulkin Chevrolet, the world's largest Corvette dealer for 4 consecutive years. Last year, over 1,800 new Corvettes were purchased from McMulkin Chevrolet, setting a record for the highest number of new Corvettes ever sold in a calendar year by one single dealership. Experience why Corvette enthusiasts from all over the USA continue to choose McMulkin Chevrolet, with hundreds of Corvettes in stock and ready for immediate delivery nationwide.
I'm Elmer Heinrich, at 91 years of age, here with my wife Shirley, who is 83. Now, both of us are still cutting a wide swath in life, all because of Immuno 150. Now, we are asking you to use Immuno 150 like we do. Give it a chance for at least 90 days so that you can see what 70 plant minerals and 80 additional nutrients can do for you.
It really is incredible.
Yeah, try it. You will be surprised. Order now. You'll be glad you did.
A peace plan for Gaza. For the plan to advance, Hamas must disarm. Instead,
tonight, terrifying images emerging from Gaza. Videos show Hamas-linked gunmen carrying out a public execution as they return to the streets.
Hamas on a rampage, executing Palestinians, bloody crackdown, spreading terror. For freedom, not terror, Hamas must go.
A horror in Nigeria. Christians are being persecuted, murdered just because of their faith. Earlier this week, we showed you Nicki Minaj at the United Nations putting the spotlight on this growing crisis. The rapper called for the protection of Christians in Nigeria. She said churches are being burned and families ripped apart simply because of how they pray. Last month, President Trump declared Nigeria a country of particular concern. He said thousands of Christians are being killed by radical Islamists. Trump then demanded action from Congress. Well, today there was a hearing on Capitol Hill on this exact topic. Foreign Affairs correspondent Alex Salvi joins me. Alex, what happened?
Yeah, Greta, so this House Foreign Affairs Committee was trying to get to the bottom of exactly what is happening in Nigeria and what can be done to stop the persecution of Christians that are taking place in the country. And keep in mind, a big obstacle that President Trump is going through, as well as some of the members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, is the fact that a lot of people say that this isn't happening at all. That's what they were talking about today. And what they did in order to get some confirmation there is they brought in a bishop from Nigeria to say not only is this real, but it's becoming a worse problem. And he's going as far to say that President Trump should step in to bring an end to the killing.
Why are they saying that's not happening? I mean, I've seen pictures. Actually, I've gotten some pictures from some people that can't even be shown on TV.
Sure.
I mean, these people didn't commit suicide in these churches.
Well, it was just last week where a representative from the United Nations said that there was no targeted killing of Christians that is taking place inside of the country. He said that it was more complex, and to his credit, it is a very complex situation. There's geopolitical lines, there's religious lines, there's even some economic lines of why this is happening. But make no mistake about it, there is a targeted killing of Christians that is happening inside of Nigeria. Some estimates say that for the past 14 years, upwards of 50,000 people could have been killed. At the very least, 4,000 people killed every single year. Keep in mind that's the largest number of Christian persecutions in the entire world happening right in Nigeria. Now President Trump wants to do something about it.
Was there any discussion at all at the hearing about how the United States can't be the police of the world? Because that's the whole problem. I just talked to the ambassador in Ukraine. A lot of Americans would say we don't want to spend money there because we have problems here at home. But I mean, Nigeria is just a whole nother. I mean, was there discussion of what we could do, or what was something that the United States could, would want to do?
Well, earlier this morning, a State Department official said that the United States has a two-pronged approach right here. The first one is if they are going to get involved, it's going to be through economic sanctions, putting pressure on the Nigerian government to take action themselves. And the second option, and the one that we've heard more recently from President Trump, is to force them through counterterrorism operations. Keep in mind, a lot of the people that are carrying out these horrific crimes are Islamic insurgents from Boko Haram or Al-Shabaab, these Islamic insurgents that don't just target Christians, by the way. They're also targeting Muslims who don't align with their vision of the world, but also these Christian groups in particular are being targeted. Just yesterday, there was a church shooting that killed 2 people, and the week before, there were 25 young girls kidnapped from a school. Those were Muslim children, predominantly. So Muslims and Christians are being targeted in the country, and that's maybe why the UN representative said that there's a more complex situation that's being taken care of.
How strong is the Muslim government?
Well, it's split about 50-50. And for people at home thinking about this, Muslims are predominantly in the north, Christians are predominantly in the south. But there's this also economic thing that's happening as well, where there's predominant Muslims who are the farmers in some ways, as well as a lot of Christians who are also farmers as well. And what they're doing is competing for these very limited resources in the country. So that's why another argument that is made against it says this isn't about religion necessarily. This is about economic ties. This is about the geography of the country. But then again, when you really look at the micro developments that are taking place inside of the country, there's no doubt that people are being targeted based on their religion. In fact, Pope Leo has come out and spoken out against that, as well as some of the other crimes that are happening in Africa.
There's some people, podcasters here in the United States that say it's not happening.
Well, there's a lot of podcasters that say a lot of things in the United States, unfortunately.
I know, but it's just they act like, people are delusional. You look at the pictures and you're delusional. Here you see these people in these churches that are burned or something,
right,
and they're saying it's not happening.
Yeah, don't believe what your eyes
Don't believe what your
eyes,
your lying eyes.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that kind of gets back to something that a lot of Christians have said for a long time, that for some reason when it comes to Christian persecution, there's a higher bar that needs to be reached. I'm not going to speak on that or give my opinion on that, but that has been an argument that has been made for a long time. And they look at what's happening in Nigeria, for example, and say, this is exactly what we're talking about. If 4,000 people were being killed every year based on their religion anywhere else in the world, or based on any other religion, this would be something that we would hear about on our TVs much more. And President Trump has brought attention to this as of recently, and based on what we saw on Capitol Hill today, it seems some Republican lawmakers are getting on board as well.
Well, if the government's rather friendly to the United States, and I think that it is that I don't know if economic sanctions would have any impact at all, because, I think the government almost seems powerless.
Well, you bring up a great point, too. Nigeria is not a small country, 230 million people. It's Africa's biggest country. There are economic things that go into play for the entire region when we're talking about Nigeria. But you're right, there should be ways to apply pressure in a way that doesn't necessarily come in the form of sanctions or military intervention. And it seems that maybe what President Trump is trying to do right now, when you look at the language that he's been using, he's not saying stop or get your act together. He's saying that we will go in, quote, guns a-blazing. There will be a price of hell to pay if nothing is done. And we've seen President Trump do this with South Africa, for example. If he doesn't like the way that the government there is behaving, not only will he embarrass you on the world stage, but he'll boycott you, such as they were doing with the G20. There won't be an American representative because it's being hosted in South Africa. So there are other ways to go about it using soft power.
Well, do you remember during the Obama administration, Boko Haram kidnapped all those schoolgirls?
Yes.
And the world was outraged, and people would hold signs up saying the number of girls, and even the former First Lady Michelle Obama got active in it, and everyone is outraged, and then all of a sudden the story just vanished, and it's almost been like quiet for 10 years. The media has neglected this story. I can't imagine that these atrocities stopped.
Right. Now, oftentimes it's out of sight, out of mind when it comes to that. And the groups we're talking about, Boko Haram, that was a group that was largely considered to be too radical for ISIS. And then you have this other group, an al-Qaeda-linked group, al-Shabaab. I don't need to speak about how terrible al-Qaeda has been for religious freedoms in the area. But these are the types of things that President Trump has talked to the leader of Saudi Arabia about, Syria, these types of joint efforts where it's getting these more proximate countries involved to fight counterterrorism within their own area. And there have been countries that have helped in our fight against ISIS, and perhaps that's what the president is trying to do here, is direct much of the region's attention to Nigeria, say this is just as much your problem, if not more so, than it is the United States. You guys need to get on board, or else you'll have economic prices to pay.
It's like as we approach Thanksgiving, and as I listen to you describe everything, I think, boy, are we lucky we live here.
We really are. We really are. You and I can go outside, practice whatever religion we want, do whatever we want for the most part.
We even have a constitution that says it protects your religion, protects your speech, protects everything. And, what's going on around the world is just breathtaking.
Don't take it for granted, right?
No, indeed. Alex Salvi, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And today at the National Cathedral here in Washington, a funeral was held for former Vice President Dick Cheney. Hundreds paid tribute to the 46th Vice President. Those attending included former Vice Presidents Kamala Harris, Mike Pence, Al Gore, and Dan Quayle. Also seated in the front row was former President Joe Biden. Former President George W. Bush delivered a eulogy for his vice president. Cheney served as vice president for 8 years. Here's part of the tribute from former President Bush.
25 years ago, I had a big choice to make, a big job to fill. I want to know all my options, so I enlisted the help of a distinguished former White House Chief of Staff and Secretary of Defense to lead my search for running mate. Dick Cheney and I went through the files name by name. We talked over the various qualities I was looking for in a vice president. preparedness, mature judgment, rectitude, and loyalty. Above all, I wanted someone with the ability to step into the presidency without getting distracted by the ambition to seek it. After weeks of these meetings, I began to have a thought I could not shake. I realized the best choice for the vice president was the man sitting right in front of me. And I told him that. At such a moment, most in this position would have jumped at the chance, but Dick stayed detached, and he analyzed it. Before I made my decision, he insisted on giving me a complete rundown of all the reasons I should not choose him. He also heard one of my top advisors was against the choice, so Dick invited him to make the case. As he did so, he sat there unfazed and expressionless. In the end, I trusted my judgment. I remember my dad's words when I told him what I was planning. He said, "Son, you couldn't pick a better man."
Who was missing from the funeral? Former Presidents Barack Obama and Bill Clinton. Both were invited but did not attend. So who didn't get invited? The current president and vice president. President Trump and Cheney were not on good terms. Why? Well, during the 2024 presidential election, Cheney endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris. In his statement endorsing Harris, Cheney wrote, quote, "In our nation's 248-year history, there has never been an individual who is a greater threat to our republic than Donald Trump," end quote. Today, the uninvited Vice President, J.D. Vance, said this.
My condolences go to Dick Cheney and his family. Obviously, there are some political disagreements there, but he was a guy who served his country. We certainly wish his family all the best in this moment of grieving.
Coming up, the outrage of the day, and this one is sure to make your head spin. That when the record continues.
For 250 years, brave servicemen and women have been stepping forward to defend the freedoms America stands for. At Wounded Warrior Project, it's our honor to serve this generation of injured veterans.
I'd do it all over again, but people need to know freedom isn't free.
I am proud to have served for 20 years of the 250 years. It's just the screams, the smells, the vivid images. It's like a recording in my head, and I can still hear those screams.
It's crucial for our veterans to get the benefits they deserve. Please join Wounded Warrior Project. With a gift of just $19 a month, you will provide free programs and services that can change a person's life forever.
When you almost lose your son, and to see him the way it is today, so thankful.
Call or go online with your gift of $19 a month, and we'll send you this limited edition blanket honoring the 250th anniversary of American independence and freedom.
In 250 years, a lot of good people gave their life for this country. My daughter, she gave up her health for this flag.
For veterans, rock bottom is not a pretty sight. There were plenty of days where I just didn't want to go on, and in walked Wounded Warrior Project. My goodness, 250 years, it's humbling, and all the donations that people give is so important.
He represents all the soldiers. They still need help. Thank you, he says.
Please give a little to those who gave so much for us.
I'm Elmer Heinrich, at 91 years of age with my wife Shirley, who is 83. Now both of us are still cutting a wide swath in life, all because of Immuno 150. Now neither of us have any kind of sickness, and we're as flexible as we were 30 years ago, and we still do the physical things we did 30 years ago. Now we are asking you to use Immuno 150 like we do. Give it a chance for at least 90 days so that you can see what 70 plant minerals and 80 additional nutrients can do for you. You won't believe it. Immuno 150 is an awesome nutritional supplement. There's nothing like it.
Yes, it really is incredible.
Yeah, try it. You will be surprised. Order online or call the number listed on the screen, but don't place your order until after you've watched the videos on our website. Thank you from both of us, and God bless.
Well, it's time for the outrage of the day alert. Today's outrage involves a National Guard fighter pilot who was forced to spend 6 years and $70,000 of his own money fighting to prove his neck injuries were service-related. By the way, fighter pilots flying F-16s routinely pull up to 9 Gs. That is 9 times the force of Earth's gravity. That is rough on the neck. Now, according to a report by my old colleague, Catherine Herridge, in 2019, fighter pilot Cody Kurland injured his neck on a routine training mission in Guam. After the mission, Kurland received an MRI. The MRI showed Kurland had 2 herniated discs and a bulging disc all in his neck. According to military records, Kurland's commander concluded that his neck injuries were caused by his military service. That means any follow-up surgeries or disabilities would be covered naturally by the military. But that's not what happened. Once Kurland's case got to the National Guard Bureau headquarters, his neck injuries were denied. And guess who they were denied by? You're going to have to sit down for this one. A trained gynecologist. Yes, not a spine specialist, but a gynecologist. That's about as crazy as it gets if it were not for all the suffering and personal expense. The National Guard Bureau claimed Kurland's symptoms resolved and were then aggravated by an intervening event like a bike ride or flying as a commercial pilot. Kurland has denied these claims. This past September, after 6 years of fighting, the Air Force finally reversed its denial and officially recognized Kurland's injuries as service-related. My thought, okay, what kind of knucklehead has a gynecologist determine a fighter pilot's injuries in his neck and spine? And more bad news for former Secretary of the Treasury and Harvard professor Larry Summers. After a House committee recently released emails between Jeffrey Epstein and Summers, Summers left his position on the board at OpenAI. And now he's leaving another place, his post as a Harvard professor. This comes after Harvard announced it is launching an internal investigation. And just 2 days ago, Summers told his students, quote, "I think it's very important to fulfill my teaching obligations, and so with your permission, we're going to go forward and talk about the material in class." Well, obviously that didn't last long. Meanwhile, today is the deadline for Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, formerly known as Prince Andrew. He was to respond to the House Oversight Committee. The committee wants to interview Andrew about his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. The committee has seen, among other things, financial records with notations that say, "massage for Andrew." The House Oversight Committee has asked Andrew for a voluntary sit-down testimony. The committee is investigating Epstein's sex trafficking network and the government's handling of his case. So far, there has been no response from Andrew's side. And in the northernmost part of America, the sun has set, and it will not be back for 2 months. This week, the northern tip of Alaska saw its last sunset of the year. What is known as the long polar night is now underway. More than 4,000 people live in Alaska's northernmost city, Ukit-Agvik. They will live mostly in the dark until next year. They will have a little light, but it will not be as bright. But it's only for a few hours of the day, too. And the sky will be then faint blue. It kind of looks like the sky before sunrise or after sunset. The next actual sunrise will be on January 22nd, 2026. That is 63 days from now. But there's a trade-off for 2 months of dark. In the summer, the sun doesn't go away. It does not set for more than 2 months. Coming up, after all the outrage of the day, sometimes a snack can go a long way. That when the record continues.
Drop is finally here. Drop delivers the weight loss benefits of GLP-1 injections in easy-to-use oral drops, no needles.
That's right. The two big drawbacks with weight loss injections are high costs and weekly injections. Drop is flavorless and odorless, so you can just add it to water or your favorite beverage. Drop offers other advantages over injections too. With Drop, you can personalize your dosage based on your weight loss goals.
And because you add Drop to any liquid, there's no concern about injection site infections, bruising, or dosage confusion.
Drop is the easier, safer, cost-effective alternative to help you achieve your weight loss goals without the needles.
The Black Friday sale is on with the lowest price of the year. Order online at dropthepounds.com/Black Friday. That's dropthepounds.com/Black Friday.
I'm Elmer Heinrich, at 91 years of age with my wife Shirley, who is 83. Now, both of us are still cutting a wide swath in life, all because of Immuno 150. Now, neither of us have any kind of sickness, and we're as flexible as we were 30 years ago, and we still do the physical things we did 30 years ago. Now, we are asking you to use Immuno 150 like we do. Give it a chance for at least 90 days so that you can see what 70 plant minerals and 80 additional nutrients can do for you. You won't believe it. Immuno 150 is an awesome nutritional supplement. There's nothing like it.
Yes, it really is incredible.
Yeah, try it. You will be surprised. Order online or call the number listed on the screen, but don't place your order until after you've watched the videos on our website. Thank you from both of us, and God bless.
Hello, this is Franklin Graham. This Thanksgiving, what are you thankful for? You're thankful for family, your friends. How about God? That's right. Are you thankful for God? You see, God made you. He created you. He loves you. And you say, but Franklin, my life is in such a mess. I'm not sure I'm thankful for my life. Well, that's why God sent his son, Jesus Christ, to this earth to save us from this mess of sin that we live in. You see, that's right. God sent his son, Jesus Christ, to this earth to take your sins. He died and shed his blood on a cross for our sins, but on the third day, God raised him to life. He's not dead. He's alive. And he'll come into your heart right now if you invite him. Just pray this prayer with me. Just say, God, I'm a sinner. I'm sorry. Forgive me. I want to invite Jesus to come into my heart, to take control of my life. I want to surrender my life to him. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Prayed that prayer. Call that number that's on the screen.
There's nothing worse than losing your dog before their time.
That's why I created Dr. Marty Nature's Blend, designed to help dogs with everything from digestive issues to itching, even moving better.
Nature's Blend works because it's freeze-dried. So instead of destroying the nutrients with high heat, they all get right into your dog's body.
Take it from a veterinarian with over 50 years of experience saving dogs' lives. I have never seen a food make this much impact on a dog's health.
For a limited time, get up to 54% off Dr. Marty Nature's Blend, plus a free gift with our special TV offer. Call or go to drmartypets.com/TV.
Sponsored by Dr. Marty Nature's Blend, the health of fresh food with the convenience of kibble. Visit drmartypets.com/TV.
Police in Ohio got an unusual call. The call was for, of course, a cow on the loose on the highway. All lanes had to be shut down as officers worked to round up the runaway. Body cam footage shows officers trying to lasso the cow. The cow by the name has a name. She is named Marigold. Marigold is a Highland cow who escaped from a livestock trailer. Officers tried every approach they could to get her, but Marigold refused to cooperate. So finally they tried to appeal to the cow's stomach. One officer pulled out a bucket of grain. That is when Marigold followed willingly back to safety. It seems she just needed or wanted a little snack. The Chris Salcedo Show is up next. Stay with Newsmax.